welcome to Horns of a Dilemma. I'm Doyle Hodges, Executive Editor of Texas National Security Review. On this episode of Horns of a Dilemma, we listen in as author Darren Dochuk talks about his new book, Anointed with Oil, How Christianity and Crude Made Modern America. Dochuk describes his book as a religious biography of oil. Specifically, he talks about how oil grafted itself onto the soul of the United States and the identity. He coined the term wildcat Christianity to describe the actions of oil prospectors who turned the profits from their ventures to supporting Christian missionary endeavors around the world, and traces how the religious identity and cultural identity of the United States are all intertwined with this precious national resource. Let's join and listen in on the conversation.
Good to see you all. Thank you so much, Will and Jen and Elizabeth and all those here who made this visit possible. It's always a great pleasure to be back in the great state of Texas. I've spent considerable time here, no surprise, doing just a bit of research. And in fact, did some very important research early on in this project right here at the Briscoe Center. It was while I was finishing up my first book on the Sun Belt, Bible Belt to Sun Belt, that I decided to take a break and read through some oral transcripts of oil workers in Texas. It's a wonderful collection, and that's when I came across one character in particular, Patil Higgins, who turns out to be just this fascinating character. He's kind of a Robert Duvall, the Apostle, meets Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood, and I immediately latched onto that and knew that I could not let this drop, and sure enough, returned to it later. So it is good to be back here in Austin and at the University of Texas. Just a bit of oil and religion going on around here. There's just a bit of that going around in Alberta, Canada, my home where I grew up. And I had the privilege of just being there last week, in fact, as they approached the federal election. And turns out not much has changed since the 1980s when I grew up there and left. There is, again, this fierce protection, custodianship of traditional fuel and family values that continues to mobilize so many Albertans and make it, in many ways, the Texas of Canada as well, a label that it proudly wears. So my visit confirmed my research findings in this book, that oil is not just a commodity around which businessmen and politicians rally, but an imprint on America's and Alberta's soul. Oil has not only been imagined by Americans in sacred terms as if it is a blessing from God, it has also provided the means for so much institution building and theological infighting within the American church. On the other hand, religious institutions and individuals with proximity to crude have, across time, imposed their cultural clout on the oil industry, infused it with their beliefs and practices, and ensured that God and black gold be partners in America's economic and political development at home and abroad. And so over the course of the next few minutes, I simply want to highlight kind of two competing gospels of crude, if you will, and just kind of hint at, briefly show how I think these two different religions, these two different faith traditions of crude have done much to align and realign American politics over the course of the past 20th century, and certainly will welcome questions and the opportunity to fill in some gaps. This is a book that covers a lot of ground. This is just going to be a snippet that looks especially at the mid-20th century. An appropriate starting point to our afternoon here is the televised speech that President Jimmy Carter delivered exactly 40 years ago in the summer of '79. The Crisis of Confidence speech was one of the most important of his career, as it came at a precipitous time amid revolution in Iran and an attending energy crisis. With a seriousness that emanated out from the large desk at which he sat, he pleaded for people to support his energy conservation agenda. But the speech, we know, turned into something much more than that. As I was preparing, he explained, I asked myself, why have we not been able to get together as a nation to resolve our serious energy problem? It's clear that the true problems of our nation are much deeper, and here he slammed his fist, deeper than gasoline lines or energy shortages, deeper even than inflation or recession. It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will. Carter ended his elegy with a pledge of hope. In the days to come, let us renew that strength in the struggle for an energy-secure nation. Let us commit ourselves together to a rebirth of the American spirit. Of course, those who are aware of Carter's career know that this was not the first of his energy speeches. He, in fact, opened his presidency in April 1971, really, with another speech on behalf of energy conservation, at which point he declared that the search for alternative energy was the moral equivalent of war. And those who know about the evolution of the speech will know that many of Carter's advisors in the 1979 context, at least, pushed back and told him not to sermonize to the American people. But Carter did not budge, and the main takeaways of the 1979 speech remained his to make. First, that the U.S. had lost confidence in itself and its global standing, and second, that the crisis wasn't just energy-related, it was a moral one as well. Carter's speech cuts to some of my book's core questions, two of which are this: how did oil get grafted on the soul of American society and serve as a catalyst for its political, economic, and religious ambitions on a global stage? And what did it mean for this nation when the confidence of an American century fueled by religion and oil crumbled during the energy crisis of the Carter years? So again, in an effort just to touch upon a couple of these queries, I'll first cut at the high altitude level and look at a couple of facets of what I call a religious biography of oil, starting with a look at some of American power brokers circa 1940s, who, as major oil in particular, and this is the sector that I will focus on in this context, looked to global fields. They also kind of reimagined the American century as well, very much in line and in tune with the possibilities of big religion and big oil. I'll then cut to another strand of religion and oil, one in which I'll probably focus more on, and that's wildcat Christianity, which really brings Texas and Alberta together in one narrative. And depending on time, we'll finish with some of the legacies of this history. Petroleum first possessed America's soul in the 19th century as the fuel and lubricant that would light its cities and grease its modern machinery and economic ascent. This was abundantly evident in the popular literature of the time, which sparkled with bold predictions of American oil's manifest destiny. American petroleum is omnipotent and omnipresent in fulfilling its grand mission of enlightening the whole universe, one magazine declared in 1900. As much as U.S. oil was mythologized in biblical abstraction, it also influenced God-fearing individuals who translated such convictions into real institutional structures and policies of significance. Their efforts were evident in early generations of the petroleum industry, but they started to carry real weight as U.S. influence expanded abroad in the mid-20th century. Consider, for instance, Henry Luce, pictured here. In February of 1941, we're all familiar with, of course, the missionary son turned media lord used the pages of Life magazine, which he owned, to beseech Americans to recognize their status as protector of the free world and create the first great American century. Unbeknownst to his readers is that Luce tested this charge a month earlier in an address to the American Petroleum Institute. There he praised oilmen for being the vanguards of America's expanded role in the world. Having within you a dynamic spirit of freedom and enterprise and a genius for cooperation and organization, it follows inevitably that you do not stop at the frontier of mountains or sea or jungle, nor at the man-made frontiers of knowledge or tradition or hope. For your sense of the illimitable roundness of the world, I salute you. Luce was especially enamored of large oil corporations that were exploring for oil across the globe, and in the process, spreading modern technologies and know-how. It was at this time that the Seven Sisters, which included seven sisters of major oil at this time, including 5 major U.S. companies, that were turning outward abroad, urged on by Washington to discover foreign fields before domestic reserves ran out, a real fear in the 1940s. For Luce, the corporate labors of these companies conjured a sense of limitless power, which, when harnessed by God-fearing patriots, held the capacity to transform the world into something godlier and good. America's special blessing, oil, was in his mind also its prophetic charge. He drew on metaphor to encourage his compatriots to use oil to fuel international advancement with America at the head. Scholars have shown how this nation's singular possession of petroleum served as one pillar of the American century. Luce, the term's architect, suggests that a religion of ecumenical outreach and global exchange be treated as its twin column. Luce's sense of vocation spoke to the inspiration of a whole cadre of visionaries. Power brokers with rising influence in mid-20th century major oil in the state, they adhere to what I call a civil religion of crude. A confidence that big religion, defined as ecumenical, internationalist, civil, cosmopolitan, wedded to big oil, defined as fully integrated, combined and collective effort between state and company to foreign fields, that this combination could guarantee the nation's global authority. Now, as you probably know, the linchpin and guiding spirit of this cadre was the Rockefeller family, on whose money the Luce family depended while serving as missionaries in China. It was John D. Rockefeller Jr., or simply Mr. Jr. as he was known around the Luce household, who came to embody the civil religion of crude by placing the profits of his family's oil empire in the service of its broad initiatives. Frustrated with evangelistic strategies of outreach, he built a philanthropy that stressed scientifically informed international development. In the realm of corporate relations, meanwhile, his influence was imprinted on The Lamp, the magazine produced by Standard New Jersey, or Exxon, to keep employees, stockholders, and a wider public inspired to advance petroleum's humanitarianism into societies of all racial composition and stages of development. Junior's sense of mission got a boost in 1940 when his 5 sons founded the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Of the 5, none was more important, something I'm sure we are aware of here, of linking oil to international development than Nelson Rockefeller, pictured above, whose work with inter-American affairs placed him at the forefront of U.S. plans in South America, and incidentally, whose work with Creole Oil Company in Venezuela prior to this point had really brought him to design a model of kind of corporate relations that stressed class and social equality, as well as faith and family values, with the Catholic Church on the company compound occupying a key space. Nelson was not outspokenly religious, granted. He practiced his faith, but he was too humble to preach it. Henry Kissinger would later eulogize him. But Rockefeller was a man who wanted to reshape the emerging world in an image of Christian democracy. Indeed, big oil's apostles may not have worn biblical convictions on their sleeves. They were willing to drop doctrinal insistencies for the sake of universal brotherhood and an imperial logic of service. Yet, however much they were drained of its dogmatism, oil's promise continued to inform their actions. Its solicitations to extract God's bounties from the earth with an eye to a higher being and a higher sense of being. Oil's global topographies in this way became their theological planes. Thanks to yet another member of this cadre, William A. Eddy, oil's global topographies and theological resonance expanded rapidly and dramatically in the 40s and 1950s. Eddy was the son of Presbyterian missionaries in the Middle East who were part of the contingent of Western Protestants responsible for the founding of American University Beirut, which would be, of course, a key intellectual epicenter going forward. His parents' generation was also critical to Western oil's incursion in the Middle East during the early 20th century. Part of his mother and father's generation, of course, would be instrumental in, for instance, guiding British Petroleum, at that time Anglo-Persian oil hunters into Persia, and guiding other kind of oil geologists into regions that they thought were ripe for exploration. And going forward, of course, this generation of missionaries would also serve as key liaisons to various government and rulers in the area. But Eddy would be more than a one-time liaison to Western oil. He would be one of the most important technocrats. He came to that status with significant skill. He was trained at Princeton and then went on to teach at American University Cairo before becoming president of Hobart College. By the early 1940s, Eddy was a man of Protestant confidence who envisioned a new world order constructed out of enchanting crude. In 1940, while recruiting support for Hobart, he lectured on the power of God in the secular world, which implored lay people to be, quote, the shock troops of the church and assume the super-secular task of transforming each sector of the globe. Typical line from this: you and I who believe in Christendom are not doomed to weakness. We serve the only totalitarian king. We who follow Christ need to cover ourselves with tolerance, reverence, and charity, and then wherever we walk, we shall find ourselves standing on holy ground. Within months, Eddie was acting on this imperative, serving as an officer for the Office of Strategic Services to survey Arabia for subsurface crude, gain knowledge of its people and their faith, and bring the U.S. into union with the kingdom. And of course, famously, pictured here before you, 5 years later, he would serve as a translator and liaison between Saudi's King Ibn Saud and American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, very much installing the United States in Saudi Arabia. Eddie's subsequent career was testament to the potency of his liberal internationalist vision. As a consultant for the Chevron and Texaco-owned Arabian American Oil Company, or simply Aramco, and an Arabist in political sympathy, Eddie promoted peace between Western and Saudi interests by way of mutual fiscal ambition and shared respect for the divine. Through aggressive proliferation of corporate promotion, as well as practical instruction on how to live and labor in a land saturated with God and black gold, Eddie not only wrapped Aramco in a myth of enlightened capitalism and corporate benevolence, but also animated ground-level operations on the drill sites and in the oil camps with a tenor of intercultural and ecumenical exchange. Now, of course, much has been written about Aramco, a good deal of it highly critical of Aramco's imperial project. What was striking to me as I made my way through the sources of Eddie's and several of his colleagues is the degree to which, at least on the ground level, at the managerial level, so many workers within Aramco envisioned this truly as an experiment in ecumenical exchange. There was, for instance, Aramco's Arabian Affairs Division, which was staffed with leading experts in Islam, in religion, who then in turn produced the educational materials that oil workers would digest prior to their arrival in Saudi Arabia. Once arrived, they would find a surprisingly large and most certainly secretive kind of infrastructure of worship on the campuses of Aramco. What were called morale groups instead of churches, of course, which were outlawed, were dozens, perhaps hundreds of these cell groups around Aramco that these Arabists helped promote. By the mid-50s, some 5,000 Catholics alone at Aramco were worshiping in these sites, and more broadly encouraging the types of ecumenical exchange that took place within these cell groups or on the drill sites of Aramco itself. Aramco's Arabists did more than build a vast underground church, however. They also formed a powerful lobby with the politics of religion their priority. Tied as they were to Major Oil and to Washington and the Rockefeller ecumenical vision, they held expectations that their corporate venture would lead to a greater sense of universal brotherhood and peace. Eddie himself saw in the Saudi oil venture a model of post-sectarian exchange for the world's post-war era. The Aramco kingdom was a microcosm, he suggested, for how the US and Saudi Arabia, and by extension the entire Middle East, could bond by way of a shared commitment to a monotheistic religion. In a speech to the Middle East Institute in Washington, he called on Americans to, quote, reorganize and recognize the moral alliance of Christianity and Islam. It's always seemed to me, he said, that not enough has been made of the common ground between these great religions. We have not only the belief in one God, we also share with Islam many of our prophets and much of our scripture. Eddie's charge stemmed from his own theology of grace, as well as his family's rootedness in the Muslim Holy Land. But of course, it also contained a pragmatic edge. It wouldn't take very much for us to mobilize all that religious sentiment in the fight against Russian communism, he implored. All that was required was for the US to extend a hand of friendship. Eddie would gain some reward for this commitment. Soon after ascending to the White House, Dwight Eisenhower would nurture a political consensus based on shared Judeo-Christian values. His would be a call for all Protestants, Catholics, and Jews to create one nation under God, a republic populated by people of the book and buttressed by monotheism that would spread freedom worldwide and roll back the encroaching influences of communism. With Aramco's advocates urging him on, the president would attempt a bolder progression to turn his tri-faith America into a quadrilateral. Alongside Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, Eisenhower hoped Muslims at home and abroad would join in a coalition of the faithful to fight secularism and the Red Menace. Eisenhower's visit to Washington's new Islamic Center in 1957, coupled with the Saudi king's visit to the capital that same year, would strike Eddy and his peers as a sign that their civil religion was now America's as well. The civil religion of crude is one thread in oil's biography, vital to understanding the nation's quest for global authority and Pax Americana. I'm now going to turn to the other strand of faith in oil, which has also shaped American politics at home and abroad in some crucial ways. I deem this strand of faith in oil wildcat Christianity. Technically, wildcatter refers to oil's industrious rank and file whose quests for crude were legitimated by mineral rights that granted anyone authority to tap subsurface crude. This rule of capture allowed them to drill wildcat discovery wells and take as much oil as they wished from them, even if that meant draining the pool under a neighbor's property. For John D. Rockefeller Sr., the rule of capture was wasteful. His was a bureaucratic outlook that lined up with Max Weber's Protestant work ethic, which assumed that good capitalists would uphold rules of calculation and control. Whereas Rockefeller sought to dull oil's laissez-faire free-fall, the small independent producers who abhorred his monopoly in oil's first frontier of Western Pennsylvania saw in their rule of capture indelible virtues. For these wildcatters, these fierce independent oilmen, the rule was sacrosanct and protected their wishes to act alone. They reveled in risk-taking and accepted the volatilities of chance and pursued profits as if there were no tomorrow. In Weber's rendering, they were warrior heroes. Now, as you see here, at the turn of the century, wildcat Christianity, held too tightly by thousands of independent oilmen, would make its way west, of course, forced west by Rockefeller's hold of oil in Western Pennsylvania. They would make their way to Southern California, where, to the surprise of Standard Oil itself, in fact, one Standard executive boasted that he would drink every gallon of crude west of the Mississippi. This is how sure he was that it didn't exist there. Of course, we know the rest of the story. It does indeed exist there, and it made itself evident first in California, and then, of course, at Spindletop in 1901 on the Gulf Coast, and subsequently in Oklahoma and East Texas, the 1930s. The East Texas strike of the 1930s would be especially important for the politics of religion going forward into the mid and late 20th century. This was the largest pool of oil found at this time, a pool of 43 miles long, 10 miles wide, containing 5.5 barrels. Now, why is this also important? It takes place in among the four poorest counties of East Texas, in one of the poorest regions of the country during the Depression. So as you can imagine, this discovery, which is going to last throughout the decade, is going to become the epicenter of some incredible dynamics, both within the church, as you see here pictured. Below you, churches would be at the center of oil exploration, and as the region as a whole. It would also be absolutely crucial to these independent oilmen who move into this region. Standard, the majors would continue to doubt that oil existed here in substantial quantities, allowing these independents to sweep in there, and by mid-1930s be in control of by far the most wells of the some 22,500 drilled at this point. Enraptured with the black stuff, East Texans revamped a wildcat system of belief that legitimated their ownership of crude. Amid the excitement, they intensified a spiritual outlook that saw God as the reason for their escape from affliction and into a reality of prosperity and empowerment. The windfall also created other effects. For one, it created a leveling of class and a rising conviction that plain folk could finally realize their destiny as equals, that the Rockefellers no longer had their grip on them. As one writer offered, here was a democratic opportunity that pushed social and economic frontiers far beyond Adam Smith's wildest dreams. It also lent urgency to their work. Bolstered by the success of their communities, Texas church folk nevertheless knew, again with oil derricks literally surrounding them, that oil was impermanent, that busts always followed booms. For many of them, that awareness generated distinctive eschatological thinking. Theirs was a tenuous existence that encouraged them to assign cosmic purpose to their earthly pursuits, to appreciate life's surprising bursts of health and wealth as a miraculous interlude in an otherwise difficult slide towards cataclysmic end, and pray to an all-powerful being who giveth and taketh suddenly, but who is always there. Theirs was a mentality that defied postmillennial confidence in the gradual betterment of humanity, Rockefeller's confidence, and accepted the calamities of an apocalyptic mode. Amid the ferment, oil patch citizens absorbed a related truth, that they alone had the courage to stare down end times darkness with uncompromising drive, including in their work. If time is running out, death and an afterlife on the horizon, what is a God-fearing person to do but drill, drill, drill? They acted on these impulses by fighting back against their greatest foes, which in the 30s, of course, at this time became not just the Rockefellers, but President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And of course, leading the charge in the 30s going forward would be J. Howard Pew, pictured on the left. Pew, at this point, CEO of the family-owned Sunoco, Sunoil, again, wearing a chip on his shoulder, which was typical of independence at this time. This is someone whose father was almost driven out of the business by John D. Rockefeller Sr. Sunoco survived only because it was one of the first companies on the scene after the Spindletop strike in Southeast Texas, allowing it to grow as so many other independent oil companies would do, allowing these companies to compete with the majors and quite literally put their stamp culturally, politically, religiously on Texas as a whole and the Southwest as well. And Pew was indeed beloved in the 1930s. He was considered a square dealer by locals. Sunoco was one of the most important oil producers in East Texas. From there, it would ship its oil through the Gulf to Philadelphia. Pew considered himself a Texan at heart, and throughout the 30s would fight the considerable kind of regulatory oversights that the Roosevelt government sought to impose on East Texas, for good reason, of course. This is a chaotic field, much like Western Pennsylvania, that needed to be brought under control. And J. Howard Pew would lead these wildcatters, these independent oilmen, who would bear the brunt, the costly brunt, the burdens of these costly conservation methods and regulatory oversights, and would push back against the New Deal government, very much with oil at the heart of his concern. His role in marshaling this dissent against both the Rockefellers and the New Deal liberal tradition, one that he saw flying in the face of the values, the faith and fuel values of Texas, would accelerate and intensify and widen in the post-World War II years. He would, in 1947, retire as CEO, having grown Sunoil 40 times since taking over in the 19-teens, and then would decide that he was going to pour his profits into philanthropy to offset what he considered Rockefeller's monopolism, secular liberalism in the church and in the nation as a whole. And he would forge a charitable trust established in 1948, whose goal was to, quote, acquaint Americans with the values of a free market, the paralyzing effects of government controls, and the interdependence of Christianity and freedom. Several facets of this, I just highlight a few. Where would his money go? How would he decide to offset the Rockefeller way, the Rockefeller liberalism that was now pouring through mainline Protestant churches and the National Council of Churches? Well, he would fund what would become known as the New Evangelicalism, a conservative Protestant offshoot of an earlier fundamentalism that sought to be more ironic in tone and sought to engage American culture and politics rather than reject it. Several emblems of this, of course. Christianity Today would be one of the become most popular magazine representative of this new kind of more engaged conservatism. National Association of Evangelicals would be formed at this time as well. And of course, Billy Graham, pictured above here in his cowboy hat. J. Howard Pew would be instrumental in funding each one of these. And he would draw close to Billy Graham as well. No surprise, Graham, as you see pictured here, loved Texas. He considered Dallas his second home. Took up membership in First Baptist in Dallas, which put him in proximity, no accident, to some of the most powerful, the richest independent oilmen, not just in the state, but in the country. and he would lean on their support, certainly for funding. In turn, he would pay homage to them and in many ways celebrate their independence, celebrate their values of personal freedom and libertarianism, and do so in very public ways. He starts a movie company, for instance, Billy Graham does in the early 50s, in the first two movies. First one's going to be titled Mr. Texas, which is really going to do wonders to win over Sid Richardson to the evangelical faith. And secondly, in 53, he produces Oil Town, USA, which is about Houston. Again, typical plot line in which an independent oilman gone awry, who's kind of got consumed by alcohol, finds salvation at a Billy Graham revival, and then decides to turn his life around and commit his remarkable resources to transforming American society through propagation of the evangelical gospel. This is, again, indication of just how sweeping and powerful this movement, this new evangelical movement, would be, thanks in no smart part to Billy Graham, to J. Howard Pugh, and to Sid Richardson and other independent oilmen. Now, what happens going forward into the 50s and 60s? I will just briefly outline some of what I think are some of the important pivots in the life of wildcat Christianity going forward, even as this major sector and the Rockefeller way is spreading globally into Saudi Arabia with this grand experiment of ecumenism. Independent oilmen, of course, are determined that they're going to shore up American domestic production, made all the more important and urgent by the Cold War. If we want energy security, if we want energy independence, we need to focus not on Saudi Arabia, but on our own shores in North America. And from 1947 going forward, of course, there's going to be some important finds that are going to transform the American petroleum industry, but also in many ways affect the American church. The first pictured above on the far left, anyone know who this is? An individual is on the far left here, Baptist Children's City. It's Robert Kerr, Oklahoma senator, governor, also head of Kerr-McGee, which will become famous in 47 for pulling together all of the resources possible, old wartime equipment to fish for oil, hunt for oil in the Gulf of Mexico, proving that oil, in fact, does exist in the Gulf. In 47, at that same time, we're going to have a major find in Leduc, Alberta, once again opening up another oil terrain for exploration, especially for independents, whose pockets aren't as deep and whose finances limited them to domestic oil exploration and production. Now, of course, there would be some international fields that independents would look to. These would be limited. In the 60s, they would look to Africa. But in the 50s, the only exception here would be Israel. There, because of major oil companies being outlawed from doing business, both in Arab-producing regions and Israel, it was to the independent oil sector that Israel's oil politicians, those who were in charge of it, such as Jacob Blaustein here pictured above you, it was to the Texas independents especially that they would look to for help for exploration for oil in Israel, something that's continuing to the present day with some more successes incidentally. And again, not just because I'm from Alberta, but Alberta is going to play, I think, an especially important and interesting role in this emergence of the independent oil sector, of wildcat Christianity, and the expansion of its economic and political interests at home across the continent. Now, much of this is because of the head of Alberta, and that is Premier Ernest Manning, pictured here before you. Ernest Manning was a devout evangelical, and again, to give you some indication of how the very institutional structures of petroleum itself would be shaped by religion, Ernest Manning was absolutely committed to bringing oil, finding oil in Alberta, something that would happen in 47 in Leduc. This is a rural society that needs to be transformed and modernized, and he sees oil as the way to do it. He is also a devout evangelical, grows up in a very devout home, educated at a prophetic institute, and throughout his career as a politician will speak to politics, but will also preach on the radio and travel around North America, sharing his testimony, sharing the gospel, a conservative gospel of salvation through Christ, to churches and to oil associations across the South and Southwest. Typical of this, again, of his view and the way he would use oil and see it not just as an economic matter, but something as a metaphor for salvation. This is appearing in a Billy Graham magazine in '62, using, again, allegory to promote his message, his evangelistic message. Alberta is the great oil-producing province of Canada, yet every time I look at an oil well and see the pump going up and down, I say to myself, someday that well will be pumped dry, but there is a cruise of oil which will never run dry, one that will flow on forever and ever. We should be anxious for people to know about the oil which, in the lamp of God's word, produces a light that shines across the darkness of this world, in order that men may find their way to Jesus Christ, the one alone who can save and who can solve their problems, whatever they may be. Now, a second venture, one with which we're still living in terms of the political aftermath, was also a creation of Ernest Manning and his evangelical networking. It's the Great Canadian Oil Sands, the Athabasca Oil Sands. By 1952, Manning envisions this as the next oil frontier, one that, of course, is going to require heavy investment. This is a costly venture, much more costly than conventional oil, but one that he's determined to explore as a way to put Alberta on the map globally and as a way to shore up North American energy independence and security. This would be the answer to Saudi Arabia. This would be the answer to Muslim Arab oil production. And this is something that he is going to therefore pour his great energies into. In 1952, he's going to find someone willing to partner with him on this, and that's J. Howard Pugh and Sunoco. J. Howard Pugh and Manning will already by then have been introduced through Billy Graham and Billy Graham circles. They will share sermons with each other, write each other favorite Bible verses. Incidentally, J. Howard Pugh will offer and ask for Manning's sermons that he has delivered on the radio, and Pugh will subsequently deliver those at Christmas parties for Sunoco. So this is a partnership forged through church activity and shared conviction and belief. And it's going to lead to a very concrete outgrowth within the oil sector. Pugh will deliver a check for $250 million to Manning. This is the largest private investment in Canada up to this point. And with that check, he will start the work of creating the Great Canadian Oil Sands Limited. It will take 10 years for this to come to fruition. As I said earlier, this is a very costly venture, but one, nevertheless, that Manning and Pugh are going to remain committed to. And in 1963, the task of bringing this to fruition, to actually putting buildings on this thousands of acres and start extracting oil from these thousands of acres of soil, of oily soil, will take place in 1963, and in 1967 will be officially consecrated. I'm going to run out of time here, and I don't want to press this issue. So, but just let me glance at what the politics of this all mean, and I'm sure this is something you can already anticipate. The independent oil sector generating this new economic activity, creating as well a vast infrastructure within the church, is also going to have some key political outcomes. And these are going to start perhaps earlier than some would have anticipated or that historians have treated in any depth. Hidden political victories, if you will, in our histories of religion and oil. The first would come in 1945 when, thanks to Pugh's lobbying, both Joseph Pugh and J. Howard Pugh, the Anglo-American Petroleum Agreement proposed by Harold Ickes would be quashed. Ickes had envisioned, again, America's search for oil as being essential, especially on foreign soil, and wanted to construct an apparatus between the British and the Americans to manage this new oil resources. And he himself, of course, wanted to be very much in the leadership of this. In some ways, again, carrying on this liberal internationalist tradition that is embodied in the civil religion of crude of Rockefeller, Eddy, and Luce. But thanks to the Pughs and their claims that this is a government monopoly in action that is quelling freedom of competition among all oil businesses in the United States, this agreement would, in fact, die. Second important and absolutely crucial political turn that is manufactured by this apparatus of wildcat Christianity is the Tidelands battle in the late 40s and early 1950s. This has been ongoing since 1946, when Harry Truman seized control of 10 miles of offshore oil leasing, claiming that this was federal, not state land. The pushback by states such as Texas, Louisiana, and California, of course, would be absolutely crucial to Eisenhower's campaign in 1952. Eisenhower would promise to give this leasing opportunity, this land, back to the states. Texans at that point already were forging, again, the connection between this policy and family values politics. It was leasing that was providing many resources for public education in Texas. And so there was many levels on which they were going to advocate on behalf of Eisenhower. Helping him would be preachers in the churches who would, again, decry this as not just an attack on the economy, attack on states' rights, but an attack on the kind of pioneering virtues embodied in wildcat Christianity itself. Two of the key players in this, of course, would be Billy Graham and Sid Richardson, both of whom would write letters to Eisenhower begging him to run on the GOP ticket in 1952, in no small part because of their urging. Of course, others were doing the same. Eisenhower would decide to run on a platform that included states' rights, control of offshore oil. And in 1952, we see really one of the first kind of major incursions of the Republican Party into the South. The evangelical politicking of wildcat Christianity would continue. 1964, Barry Goldwater, of course, is going to declare his defense of liberty at any cost, speaking the language of wildcatters. Wildcatters like J. Howard Pugh, who would marshal all of their resources in support of Goldwater. And of course, it didn't hurt the fact, as far as Pugh was concerned, that the opponent to Barry Goldwater in 64, of course, was none other than Nelson Rockefeller, something he took personally. Besides conjuring up bad memories of one family's near destruction of another's sustenance, Rockefeller also registered with Pugh as the face of a coercive system of centralization and compromise that had long threatened to emasculate his profession and the country's hallowed institutions and beliefs. I do know much about Nelson Rockefeller, Pugh wrote, an ally at this time, and he would be the worst man that I can think of for president of the country of ours. To put a Republican in as president like Nelson Rockefeller, who supports all of the evils that have brought this country to its knees, would be the most tragic thing that could happen. Pugh proved overly generous in his bankrolling of Goldwater. Goldwater's vanquishing of Nelson Rockefeller in the 64 GOP primaries and acceptance speech pleased Pugh, even if his defeat at the hands of Lyndon Johnson in the general election did not. Even if the political revolution that wildcat Christianity was stirring up was incomplete, by 1967 it was evident that the strand of faith and oil was on the ascendant, while that of the Rockefellers was not. The dawning realization of two different future paths was indeed stark. In the Middle East, dreams of an oil-fueled Pax Americana died a painful death. The outbreak of the Six-Day War drove that reality home for Aramco's Erebus. By then, William Eddy had been dead for 5 years. He had passed away a bitter man, frustrated with Israel's increasing leverage in Washington, as well as with Palestinian refugee crisis and rising tides of Arab nationalism. He remained committed to his civil religion of crude, his ideological charge to foster a Christian-Muslim moral alliance and uplift Arab societies through the benefits of petroleum. But by 1962, Eddy's heart, as well as his spirit, had failed him. As of the mid-1960s, Eddy's Aramco colleagues were carrying on the commission they had signed on to in the 1940s. To a surprising degree, they managed to extend the morale groups they had begun constructing then. But when the War of June 67 broke, leading to strikes in Aramco's camps and mounting threats of attack, Eddy's former Aramco friends saw their dreams die as well. They prayed that the bedlam would subside and that the status quo return, but they knew that that was unlikely. Aramco CEO and Eddy confidant Tom Barger worried about his family and business, and also about his church. He would ride the wave of transitions, however, with greater equanimity than Eddy, but he would never shy away from criticizing the entire state of affairs. In 1968, he wrote to U.S. Senator Milton Young, his friend, laying out the reasons for the ongoing crisis. Because of the overwhelming weight of Zionist propaganda and pressure in the United States, he warned the possibility of a reasoned appraisal by Americans of their interest in the Middle East was virtually zero. Barger blamed poor Arab leadership too, but his primary plea was for Washington to shake free of Zionist bondage and, for the sake of Israel itself, to shift course. The situation in the Middle East is relatively quiet as of the moment, he said, but the ingredients for another explosion here are all at hand. Should another one be touched off, American involvement is likely to be much greater and far more costly than at any time in the past. Whatever the outcome, the United States is bound to be the loser. As the Six-Day War ended, a different tone settled over Alberta, Canada. Among evangelicals there, the Israeli victory triggered expectations. The battle appeared to them as divine. Surely they believed prophecy was being fulfilled, with Christ's return and the Messianic age now on the near horizon. It was equally enlivening for Ernest Manning's partners in oil. After 3 years of grueling work by 3,000 workers to construct a viable plant, the Great Canadian Oil Sands was ready to be christened. Its alternatives to Middle Eastern crude about to be unleashed. Great Canadian Oil Sands' hardworking laborers and their hard-won victories, Sun stressed, were remarkable. Quote, "This venture combines drama, man against nature, daring, the risk of large financial resources, and science. Great Canadian Oil Sands stood, quote, as a tribute to man's inventiveness and determination to overcome the obstacles of nature." The Great Canadian Oil Sands opening ceremony in 1967 projected that same wonder. Dignitaries from around the continent wound their way in buses through the housing and civic buildings and over the bridge that Sunoco had built for Fort McMurray before arriving at the plant site. Pugh and Manning presided over the ceremony that followed. After a public prayer, they each hailed the Great Canadian Oil Sands as Alberta's and petroleum's step into a new dispensation and a new relationship with the U.S. Thanks to Manning, by the late 60s, Alberta would indeed become central to American oil's foreign outlook. U.S. imports of Canadian oil over the previous 10 years would rise from 4.9% of the total in 58 to 18.7% in 1967, compared to 8.3% from the Middle East. And Alberta and Sunoco would continue to flourish in their partnership. After Manning's retirement in 1968, Sunoco struck a rapport with Harry Strom, pictured below, Manning's successor, whose religiosity Albertans heralded. In its new leader, the province of Alberta has a man for whom the word honor carries a deeper meaning. The Honorable Harry Strom, Premier of Alberta, seeks also to honor Jesus Christ, they proclaimed. Strom's first trips after accepting the premiership went to Washington, D.C., where he attended Richard Nixon's presidential prayer breakfast, an event assisted by Billy Graham and J. Howard Pugh, and then to Philadelphia to meet with Pugh. Despite being in the midst of planning Honor America Day, his culminating ventures in religion and politics, J. Howard Pugh saw his meeting with Strom as essential, and Pugh died a short time later. I don't have time, I will pause there, but of course, what happens in the 1970s is truly the ascent of wildcat Christianity. Amid the energy crisis, something brought on in Americans' estimation by OPEC and the very Arab oil-producing states that William Eddy once partnered with. It was left to independent oilmen now to proclaim their patriotism. This was indeed time for Washington to focus on domestic reserves. This was also a time, of course, also when evangelicals would say this is a crisis period that is to be understood against prophecy and what the Bible tells us about the near future. It's one to be dealt with through a return to traditional family values and salvation through Christ alone, which in part, of course, is why 1976 would be declared the year of the evangelical, the year of the born-again movement. There are threads that come together throughout this politicking as we move back to Jimmy Carter in 1979. Indeed, Ronald Reagan would court with an America First energy program and a family values program in 1980, this constituency of wildcat Christianity. Oilmen, evangelicals across the Southwest would rally on their behalf. Malaise had no part of his repertoire, of his lexicon, and he made it clear in the wake of Jimmy Carter's 1979 speech that there was no crisis of confidence except in leadership in Washington. and that message would resonate in churches and in petroleum associations across Texas, Oklahoma, and we know the rest of the story, the Reagan Revolution. And we certainly can draw comparisons to today, where that same platform of American energy first, of wildcat Christianity, is now being proclaimed by the likes of Mike Pence in West Texas as recently as April of this year. Certainly willing to talk more about those questions, but I want to provide time for questions. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Be sure to check out all of our content online for free at tnsr.org.